detours. A lot of times in life, we say something along the line of, "This was my lucky day," or "If I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all." But as a Christian, we think beyond that to providence. We think about God is working in our life. He's working to make things good. He's working things out to achieve His will in our life so that He can bless us as we serve Him. As Christians, we look to God for all things, even when things are negative. In Genesis 50, verse 20 or 19, Joseph said to the brothers, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." As Christians, first of all, we need to think about detours as providential circumstances in our life. And so we look at our life and most roadblocks involve something that's negative. Sometimes it's something that's really good, but usually negative. And we can ask ourselves, what is God doing in my life right now? How's He working? Is it for something that I need to overcome, a spiritual stronghold? Is it something I need to start doing, a calling on my life? What is God doing? And then we need to ask, how is God directing my life? Is He directing you in a certain direction, to a certain person, or a certain service? Who is God putting in my path then to encourage and witness to is another question. And so our washing machine quit, and I've begun to reach out to people that aren't usually in my path, but ones that might know. I think it's dead, but that's okay. We have another, and we can get by. But it put me in a new circle of contacts when we deal with that. With the septic system, I was in a new circle of contacts. I made some new friends, and that's pretty cool to do that. And so, who is God putting in my life through the circumstance that I can minister to, I can encourage, and be a part of, maybe even witness to? Luck is something that happens by chance. That is, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It just pops up, and there you're lucky. And when we begin to depend on luck, we can be easily manipulated by Satan and miss what God has for us in that. When we look at Joseph, he didn't depend on luck to get out of prison. He didn't meditate his way out. He didn't use positive thinking to get his way out. He didn't visualize to get out. He trusted in God. And so while he was trusting in God, and you saw the circumstances weren't to his liking, who would want to be a slave even to a great general? Who would want to be in prison in any capacity? I went in to teach once a week, and I didn't even like that. And it's just not a pleasant thing. But he saw that God was in control, and so he made the best of it where he was. He said, "Okay, God, you put me here. I'm going to do the best I can right here." But often something will happen in life, and we'll just start wallowing in it. Oh, poor me. Woe is me. Got all these things going on, this and that. And we miss maybe an opportunity to talk to somebody along the way that we can encourage, or miss what God is doing to speak to us. Secondly, Joseph focused on what God was doing in his life. And we know that through the scripture, verses here and there. In Genesis 39, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord extended kindness to him. The Lord gave him favor. The Lord made everything he did successful. And that was to a man who kept looking to God. And that can be true in our life too. As we keep looking to God, no matter what happens, when we turn loose of all the hurts from past years, going back to day one when the doctor slapped you on the rear end, up to today, all kind of bad things happen. Turn loose of all that. Just turn loose of it. Don't worry about that. That was God working in your life too somehow to make you have the character and person you are now. And so don't worry about all that. That was all God's stuff. He allowed it. And now, what does God have for you in the future? And forgive all those along your path that have offended you. It was God that got Joseph out of jail, not luck. And Joseph kept trusting in God. God, during that time, was shaping Joseph's character. I imagine he was as messed up as his brothers back when he was 17 and back at home, having his dreams and telling his brothers and his parents about these big dreams he had. And he knew what they meant, that his family would be bound down to him, and he was the least of the crew. And he was kind of bragging about it. He had some growing up to do, some maturing. It took 22 years for him to get to the point that God could use him. God arranged circumstances. God was directing his life just where it needed to be. And he didn't just go cast him into prison. I think that would have been overwhelming to Joseph. He let him serve as a servant in Potiphar's house first, which would be akin to what he grew up in, only he had to take orders. And then he was put in the prison where he could be with the other guys that were in prison. It was God who has created this world. God spoke everything into existence. God is the one that's in control of everything that happens. He's Lord of everything. Nothing happens without God knowing it. Satan cannot do anything without God knowing it. And sometimes God allows evil to take place. He doesn't cause it, but sometimes he backs away and he allows it. And God will work in our life to put us where he needs us to be and help us clarify some of the theology that may not be quite right, our thinking. The sovereignty of God and random luck cannot both coexist. Those are two ways of things happening. The sovereignty of God and random luck. You can't have both at the same time. We have to choose. You're going to count on that luck that you count on, or you can count on the sovereignty of God. And sadly, too many Christians bounce back and forth. But we need to make up our mind this day whom we will serve. And as Joshua said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Put the Lord first. In Romans 8:28, Paul wrote, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Remember, love is doing and giving and serving. So those who love God and are serving him, doing for God, God works all things good for them who have been called according to his purpose. When we're serving God where he has called us to serve, he's going to make things work out for good. That doesn't mean always good. Because I know it's great being a pastor. I get to see a lot of things that are incredible that a lot of people don't get to see. Just God working in lives and seeing things come together. It's an amazing thing, position to be in. But also as a pastor, I've had some of those horrible things happen to me by people in the church that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I could tell you some things that happened and you wouldn't believe it. You could ask any pastor. It's not just me. It's not personal. It's any pastor. And yet God works it out for good. And all through the years that I've been a pastor, somewhere around 40 years, there have been good times and bad. I've been to different churches. At each church, I grew a little bit. In each church, there were those who were saved, too, that I was able to reach. And to the point that I'm maturing in my faith. And it takes a lot of faith to keep serving God in these times. Well, Joseph may have felt unlucky, but God was working things in his life, working them out, so that he could be blessed and could be a blessing to the world, so that he could be in the position where he served. Joseph realized God was working in his life, and he kept his faith in God. And so we read of Genesis 50:20, where he said, it's not, you meant evil, but God meant it all for good. He forgave his brothers. A maturing faith begins to see life from the perspective that God is orchestrating all the circumstances in our life, not just the huge big ones, where we will live, what city we'll work in, what house we'll buy, big things like that. But he orchestrates the little things too. Our path across Walmart may be orchestrated by God so that we can run into somebody that we can encourage or witness to. Something that simple, God can orchestrate. God orchestrates things in our life for our maturity. We're maturing along the path, and so that others can be blessed as we mature. It's when we recognize that God is working all things in our life for good, then all the bad things can be seen as part of that. And it helps us to know God and serve God better when we know God's working all things for good. If God wasn't working things for good, we should be getting even with people that offend us. And we should be angry with them and never forget it, never let them forget it. But if God's working all things for good, then we should turn loose of the hurts we got by somebody, because God's using that for our good and to be a blessing. We can become thankful for everything when we realize that God is working things out. We don't have to hold on to our anger and bitterness and be filled with regrets. We can turn loose of all that. And one of the things, as I've been doing this study, that sort of impacted me, and I guess everybody has regrets. Yeah, I wish I'd bought that when I could have. Now I can't. Matthew and I were in North Carolina one week, and we went in a rock shop, and the guy had a piece of malachite about that big, and he wanted a small amount of money for it. But I just didn't think I had the money, and I didn't think buying a rock would be wise when we might have a light bill due when I got home or something. So I didn't buy that rock, and I regret it to this day. I wish I'd bought that piece of malachite. I love malachite and rhodochrosite, both those. And there are other times, things along that line. And then you think, what's so significant about just a rock? Well, nothing. What difference does it make if I buy that rock or not? No difference at all, but I regret it. The worst regret I have in my life is one time I was working for a man, and I was going to quit work and go to school my freshman year of, I think it was my sophomore year of college. And when I left, he followed me out of the shop building, and he kept asking questions I understand now. I didn't understand then. What he was asking me to do is share Christ with him, and I didn't realize it. He was a little bit older, and I thought, he wants me to get out of his way, but he didn't. He wanted me to share Christ. And I regret to this day, that was about 45 years ago, I regret to this day that I didn't understand the circumstances and share Christ with him. He was from California and needed Christ. That's one of my biggest regrets, and that's a regret that has helped me witness to a host of people, because I don't want to have another regret like that. And, we have our regrets. If I held on to that and let it get me down, then I would be disabled as far as serving God. But I turn loose of my mistake, and I trust God to have sent somebody else, and so that I was one that watered or fertilized or whatever for that crop, so that somebody else could harvest that soul. And I've lost touch. I don't know where he is, and don't even know how to get in touch with him. But I trust God has sent somebody else to him. We have to turn loose of our mistakes. We have to turn loose of maybe the dumb things we did along the way. We have to turn loose of what we regret and keep holding on to God, trusting that what we did is something God is going to use and turn around for good. And so turn loose of regrets. Number 3, we deal with the negative circumstances by faith. Negative circumstances will happen in life. Joseph's brothers meant anything but good for him. They meant evil. But by faith, Joseph looked beyond it. If we dwell on the stuff people have done to us, we'll never find what God has for us to do. And so we turn loose of what people do to us or cause us difficulties. And we hold on to, okay, God, what do you have for us now? Or what do you have for me now? How can I serve here? It may be what we consider a step up. It may be what we consider a step down. But I think it's a great step anytime we go where God wants us to go. When I went to my last church, it was a little bitty church on the backside of the county. I've told you before, there were 12 people on that flagship Sunday with the new pastor coming that weren't my family. My job was to grow the church. The Lord blessed, and we did. We grew. That church started running. By the time I left, 50 or 60 was not uncommon. And so some said that if I go there, that's it for me. End of my career killer thing. And I never have seen being a pastor as a career. I serve the Lord. It's not a career. A career is something you do to make a bunch of money and retire, I guess. It's what you do. But I serve the Lord. Joseph's brothers made a mess. But God intended to use that mess for good. Every time something bad happens, we grow a little more sensitive toward those who something bad happened. I've said a lot that, You don't appreciate back problems till you got back problems. And how many of you know what it's like to break a rib? If you've never broken a rib, you don't know. You may think you know, but you don't know. And once you know anybody that has a cracked rib, they're hurting. They're hurting bad. And they will for a while. You kind of look at them and they hurt. But we keep on growing because every time we experience something bad, we become more sensitive to others. And when we're more sensitive to others, we're more in a position to encourage them and help them along the way. And then number 4, sometimes the blessing seems to be forgotten. You ever feel like God has forgotten you? You say, well, God, I've been faithful all these years, and it just seems like it's one problem after another just heaped upon me, and I just feel like you've forgotten me. And sometimes it feels like that, but God is still working. God knows where you are. He knows what's going on in your life. And sometimes when God doesn't seem to be working, He's working in your life to bring you to the place where you can serve. And it may be that God has a place for you to serve and people to serve, and they're not ready yet. And we're waiting on that situation to get just right so we can go. But God is working all the time. And He works out the details at the right time. Joseph waited 22 years before working with Pharaoh. And he said all that time that it was God that was working it out for a time like that. And it's referring to the food to be a blessing to many people. And it saved the world. And Joseph lived to be, that was about 30. He lived to be about 110. And so that was, 80 years? He did what God called him to do. Had to wait 22 to get there, but 80 years he served God where God had called him to serve. So remember to start looking for what God would have you do when something negative happens. When something bad happens, instead of panicking, start looking and praying. Say, God, what do you want me to do in this situation? And remain calm, for God's going to work it out. Life can be all a mess, a bad mess, right before God works it out. It seems like God lets it get that way. Don't quit just because life gets to be a mess, because it gets so hard, so difficult. You just want to throw in the towel and say, enough of this. Most of the time, your blessings are right around the corner. And if you quit, you'll miss those blessings. Hold on to the promise that God will make all things work together for good in your life, as long as you keep serving Him. Remember, God still loves you. Always does, always will, and He still has a plan for your life. At whatever age you are or place in life you are, God has a plan for your life.